Now, it's been over 48 hours since Air India Flight 171 crashed in Ahmedabad in India. The first ever 787 crash and the first full wide-body crash for over 10 years. We see the 787 take off from Ahmedabad's runway 23, taking off on its way to London Gatwick. 9-hour flight with 242 souls on board. But the flight would only last 30 seconds. The plane departures reaches a few hundred of feet until it loses altitude again and ended up crashing into a hostel right before the city of Ahmedabad. Everyone on board except of one passenger killed, many people on the ground. Right now the death toll is 270. Now, just hours after the crash, I made a video about this incident where I expressed my confusion about this crash. So this is a wide-body airliner that doesn't just fall out of the skies. Here we see the other clip that I was showing in yesterday's video. My biggest interest was in the so-called rammer turbine, which was somewhat noticeable here in the video clip. The rammer turbine is this small propeller that comes out of the 787 fuselage just behind the landing gear that doesn't provide power for flying, but it spins and provides electricity to power the flight controls and the hydraulics a little bit, as well as the electronics, of course. And it's something that's definitely also audible in this clip. We can hear a propeller spinning, that is for sure. Almost sounds like a little turboprop airplane, just like it does here in this clip. Hear it? Very much the same sound. Now, the reason why that was such a significant remark for me is that it indicates that both engines are lost. See, this rammer turbine comes out automatically in a dual engine failure, which is why I so confidently said dual engine failure. But the interesting thing is, under my video, there were 5,000 comments that significantly state other opinions and hypotheses, many of which I do not agree to. So now we have new information, and I want to give a clear picture of this. So let's talk about the things expressed under my videos. Number 1. Pilots forgot about flaps. I think one of the most talked about things with this crash are the flaps setting of this plane. It's true, for nearly every aircraft you want the flaps to be out somewhat in order to help your plane gain lift sooner. Before takeoff, you decide which flaps configuration is supposed to be set. For example, 5 degrees. See, before takeoff, you do the performance calculations, of course. Here, we select flaps 5. We select the airport, select the runway, and especially enter the weather. Now, one big thesis that people are expressing is that the plane took off without any flaps at all. And I kind of get that point. In most camera angles, the flaps don't really seem to be down much at all. We see very flat wings. And I kind of understand the idea. Something you can definitely tell about this crash already is that the plane used literally almost the whole runway here on takeoff. It was very obvious that the plane was struggling to take off anyway, but I don't think the idea that the pilots took off without flaps is plausible at all. I mean, here we are in the same configuration as the airplane, 242 souls on board, lots of fuel on board, and we're gonna take off with flaps 0. Do you hear this? This plane doesn't like it. Yes, in most modern airliners, you have a takeoff configure warning. Even if the pilots were to neglect the checklist, forget about the flaps, the plane would really warn you about this. Now, yes, of course, it could be that this alarm could be broken and you wouldn't be able to hear the airplane complain about flaps 0, but once again, not very plausible at all, but rather the reason why the plane used the entire runway for takeoff is because of weather. See, here we're taking off and this plane is not liking taking off at all. Why? Because the weather isn't very flying friendly at all. At the time of crash, around 38 degrees Celsius is reported. Extremely hot. Also, we've got very, very low air pressure, 1,000 millibars. This is what we're simulating here as well. Very low air pressure, very high temperature, and that is poison for flying because there is just not a lot of air in the air. These GNX engines don't really have a lot of, substance to work with anyway, which is why even here in the flight simulators, which is always using a little bit less runway than normal, we're using the whole runway, but come on, take off. there we go, that kind of worked, even though, by the way, our flaps are at 0 degrees. This is why in my video, I never really talked about the flaps position, mainly because I thought even in this weather and even with this weight configuration on this runway, it wouldn't make such a difference. Thesis number 2. Pilots pull the wrong handle after takeoff. Now, another big thesis that is also flaps related that I see people say is that the pilots accidentally put up the flaps after departure. So here we are yet again in the same configuration. We're taking off, and now once we achieved positive rate, instead of the first officer putting up the landing gear to, retract that, the first officer retracted the flaps to the up position like this. And that's why people say the plane lost lift. But as you can see, take this with a big grain of salt. The flight simulator is not like real life at all. Doesn't really make a big difference. Although it is true, in pilot training, you learn very quickly that you cannot retract a lot of flaps at the same time because you will lose lift. But still, this is not, I didn't think this happened at all, mainly because the flaps theory is completely debunked in a way. Here we see the slats being out, which is the flap that come out on the leading edge of the wing. As you can see, they're coming out here. Here's another part of the wing with the Alpha November Bravo registration visible. This picture right here shows the flaps are in some sort of configuration as well, although I'm not really able to confirm it. But yes, flaps, not really an issue at all. And I'm a little bit, pissed off about this because people say pilot error all the time. The pilots pulled something accidentally and the plane crashed therefore. And I don't believe that happened at all. And it's a shame for the pilots to be blamed prematurely, Now, something that people pay close attention to was, of course, the landing gear of the plane after departure. See, normally after rotation, the landing gear is being put up after, like around 9 seconds or so. So right there. And it's very obvious the landing gear was not put up here, which is, by the way, why people were saying that the pilot might have not put the landing gear up but the flaps accidentally, which would be a weird accident. But here's something that I noticed. Look at this picture closely. The landing gear, I feel like, and I want you to take this with a big grain of salt again, because it might be completely wrong. You can see the landing gear being tilted forward somehow, which is obviously not usual for the 787. The landing gear tilt is backward, just like it is here. And from no matter what position, it will look somewhat backward. Though here it probably doesn't. What's interesting about this is when we look at the gear swing of the 787. This is what it looks like when the 787 landing gear retracts. Wait for it. Gear selected up, takes a bit of a while, and gears tilted forward as much as the landing gear door opens. And this is very interesting information. Why? My hypothesis is that the landing gear was actually set to the up position, but during the retraction of the landing gear, the plane lost hydraulic power. Now, the major way for that to happen is through a dual engine failure. Now, why is this important? Because it helps us answer the question of when these engines failed. For example, my mistake in my previous video is that I assumed the engines failed somewhat when the plane was on the ground, before it actually took off. But because of the landing gear being stopped from retraction halfway through, I assume that the engines might have failed now seconds after departure indeed. Maybe 8, 9, 10 seconds, and this is when the airplane lost power. Now that's very obvious as well because otherwise the plane wouldn't have climbed as much as it did anyway. Now in my video, my biggest question was how can two modern GNX engines fail at the same time? And that is what I'm pretty sure the investigators are focusing on most. Just yesterday, the order was signed by the Director of Airworthiness here of the Indian Directorate General of Civil Aviation to do an enhanced safety inspection by tomorrow of all the things that can affect the engine, whether it's the fuel parameter, the cabin air compressor system, the electronic engine control system, the fuel pumps, oil system, and the hydraulic system, to maybe find a common flaw in the 787 fleet of Air India. Perhaps this advanced safety inspection that they're carrying through will be quite a big puzzle piece to finding out what might be wrong with the 787 fleet of Air India indeed. For something that can be ruled out, that I said yesterday, is definitely a bird strike. That's what I said. Something that could have happened is a dual engine failure happening from the bird strike, although those must have been very big flock of birds. Although here, you're not able to see anything. No smoke, no compressor stall either. These engines seem to have gone out without any visual defect, which is why most people now suggest that there might have been fuel contamination going on. Now, the flight simulator does actually simulate what happens if water, for example, were to be in the fuel. Very bad news for engines indeed, because they just end up failing. Here in the flight sim, we've got no power at all. Now, while it is true that when water is in the tanks, the engines fail quite quickly, after all, kerosene floats on water, so that means pretty immediate failure of engines. It can take a bit of a while for water to actually enter the engines indeed. Something that very much fits to that claim is some of the eyewitnesses that we have to, of course, also take with a grain of salt, but lots of people reported a loud bang. That's something that's said by bystanders and the actual sole survivor of the plane. It is very much a shame that we don't have an audio here on the CCTV footage, but the loud bang could indicate water in the fuel tank after all. The water would create steam in the engines and create a surge spike. And that is what would be a compressor surge. And because water kills combustion, an engine flameout would be possible. So it might not be about the engines, the aircraft, the pilots after all. It might be about poor ground staff handling. Something similar happened 15 years ago on Cathay Pacific Flight 780. The fuel was contaminated, and so half an hour after takeoff at 39,000 feet, the airplane slowly lost 2 engines. The engines stalled. Now luckily, because they were at a high altitude, the pilots were able to reactivate the engine number 2 and land on one single engine. Now one major difference here is of course though that the Cathay Pacific Flight 780 lost the engines at relatively different times, and it was a much slower chain of events, whereas the 787 must have lost both engines at the same time. So it might be fuel contamination, but it might have also been maybe an avionics fire. We might know about the Boeing 787 Dreamliner grounding that happened because the plane tended to have a battery thermal runaway, which would cause fire. And an avionics fire would mean a total loss of the system, and that might also be why the rammer turbine came out, or maybe why the pilots could not control the engines anymore. That might be. Maybe the engines rolled back because of an electric signal problem. And the thing is, of course, we don't know. All I do want to say is that I heavily assume that there is no pilot error involved, and the pilots did the right thing here, making sure to keep the nose up. Normally in pilot training, you learn to push the nose down after an engine failure, but otherwise you might crash. But to keep the nose down in order to have the most gliding distance possible. But in this case, it would have not really been the best scenario. After all, the plane crashed around 1.6 kilometers below the runway at a relatively lower populated area, while still taking the lives of many on the ground. But only one can imagine what would have happened if the plane glided a bit more and crashed into the actual city of Ahmedabad, which is a more populated area. The only good news we have is that we have one survivor, and I guess we're awaiting updates. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please stay respectful in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and prayers out to the deceased. Good night.